sarin. He also said he was confident that the Syrian regime mounted these chemical attacks. What evidence do you have of both, of chlorine and of the Syrian attack? And also the OPCW is on the ground now. They're collecting information on that.
We are still assessing, but as the Secretary said last night, he is confident of the evidence that we already had, and which is why he recommended the strikes last night. But we are still assessing and getting details, and we can provide more details once we have them.
Well, can you give us a sense of what evidence you do have?
There's various intel, and I won't speak to that, but when we have more evidence and more details, I will come back to you, Tom. Barbara.
For both of you, first, General McKenzie, could you speak about, in Barza and these other facilities, are you convinced there were chemical agents inside at the time of the strike? How did you mitigate not having a dispersal of a chemical agent cloud? And Dana, yesterday the president talked about the possibility of a sustained response. And the secretary last night spoke about this being a single strike at this time. Could you help people understand, is there a difference there? What are they both talking about? But for both of you, please.
Sure, I'll start, Barbara. So as we look at each of these targets, we have a variety of sophisticated models, plume analysis, other things to calculate the possible effects of chemical or nerve agent being in there. In relation to the Barza target, yes, we assessed that there were probably some chemical and nerve agents in that target. However, we believe that by the way we attacked it, the attack profile that we used, the way our weaponeers looked at it, we were able to minimize that. And so I just leave it at that. You'll be able to judge over the next few hours the results of that, but we believe that we successfully mitigated against the fact that there are illegal and unauthorized weapons at these sites.
Very briefly, are you doing any post-attack air sampling to see if there was any dispersal?
We look at the target through a variety of means.
And with respect to his comment, I think the operative word is, the words were "at this time." What happens going forward has everything to do with the Assad regime. We sent a very clear message last night, and we hope that he heard it. Joe.
General McKenzie, have you had any contacts with the Russians through the reconfliction lines in the aftermath of these operations, or are you planning to have such contacts in the next few hours?
As you know, the deconfliction channel, which we use between we and the Russians, has operated frequently over the past few months. It continued to operate frequently leading up to this strike and on a routine basis after the strike.
Hans.
General McKenzie, the three targets that you struck, were those manufacturing or researching chlorine or sarin?
A little of both, and particularly in the Marza target, but there's a little of both.
And did any of these facilities have any other non-military application?
No, they're essentially, this is what they do principally. There may be other activities that are carried on there, but this is the core activity associated with these sites.
Phil.
You said that none of the Russian air defenses were not turned on. How do you explain that? Was there an agreement?
I'm sorry, I didn't say the Russian air defenses were not turned on. I said they weren't employed.
I'm sorry. Was there an agreement with the Russians that they would not employ their air defenses? And then also, you said that the Syrian air defenses did not have any significant impact on the operations. Is that to say that there was no interception of any of these missiles that were fired?
Sure. So we did no coordination, no agreements with the Russians before the strike. It's important to know that. We deconflict, we do nothing more than that. And I want to say that to the best of our ability to determine at this time, no Syrian weapon had any effect on anything that we did.
Tara.
Thank you. Dana, for you, last year when a similar type strike occurred, there was an assessment that it had degraded Syria's ability to generate chemical weapons, yet a couple of months later, the Pentagon thought that specific airfield was right back at it. What assurances do you have now that you've significantly degraded Syria's ability to generate chemical weapons? And then for General McKenzie, that slide appears that the B-1s were escorted by U.S. fighters. Could you tell us who escorted the B-1s and what type of surface-air missiles were shot out in the air, the 40? And then getting back to the Russian defenses, if their defenses weren't employed, were Russian radars at all employed? Were they painting any of the U.S. aircraft?
So I'll take the first one. Last year, the focus was on the delivery. This time, the strikes went to the very heart of the enterprise, to the research, to development, to storage. So we are very confident that we have significantly crippled Assad's ability to produce these weapons.
Let me just answer.
I got you.
So the B-1s employed JASM, our Joint Standoff Missile. So that was the weapon that they used. B-1s were accompanied by U.S. fighters up to the launch and release point. There's a normal way you'd integrate an air package to provide protection to the bombers, just as the French and British aircraft were accompanied by their own fighters as part of an integrated package that provides defense for the shooters. Additionally, we positioned defensive counter-air around the theater, and in fact, that's still operational right now as we observe the potential Syrian response.
Were the escorts Raptors?
I don't know the answer to that question, but we'll get back to you. I just don't know that.
David, go ahead.
There were reports that these facilities, reports today that these facilities had been evacuated in the days prior to yesterday's strike. Do you have any indication, either of you, that that's the case? And wouldn't that, to some degree, degrade your assessment of the damage that's been done to the regime?
Well, sure, the Syrian regime knows that we've been looking at these targets for a long time, so it is possible that some people might have left it. We also chose to strike it at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning local time. So we weren't trying to kill a lot of people on the objective, so we would have struck at a different time of the day. I believe, however, that there is material and equipment associated with each of these sites that was not movable, and that's the source of that's what really sets them back. And to go back to an earlier question, that's really the difference between striking an airfield and essentially a delivery platform and a research, development, and generation part of the facility. This is far more damaging to Syria.
Michael.
General McKenzie, were the 3 targets that were struck, does this represent the totality of Syria's known CW infrastructure, or were there CW structures that you didn't hit because of collateral damage concerns? Second, is chlorine the new red line because the administration monitored the use of chlorine for many months and didn't take any action, and it seems only to have taken action because a nerve agent appears to have been used? And the last weapons question, was the JASM used an extended range JASM or just the first generation JASM?
So let me, in terms of the targeting, as we selected targets, obviously the Syrian chemical weapons system is larger than the 3 targets that we addressed tonight. However, these are the targets that presented the best opportunity to minimize collateral damage, to avoid killing innocent civilians, and yet to send a very strong message. We could have gone to other places and done other things, but we, in close coordination with our allies, decided these were the ones that best fit that criteria. So there's an element that is not part of the. There are other elements, and we'll continue to examine those as we go forward. So we did employ the JASM ER.
So you destroyed most of the infrastructure, 50%, 80%, or?
You can look at the map, you can look particularly at the Barza site and make your own conclusions. I would say they had 3 buildings there and a parking deck, and now they don't. So I think that's probably the one that's easiest to see because it's a building structure. I think we've dealt them a severe blow. There's some left, but we dealt them a severe blow.
What about prospective use of chlorine in the future, which administration didn't act in the event of previous use of chlorine? Daniel, will it act now? Is that a new red line?
What's important to understand is that the Assad regime has a pattern of using chemical weapons against its own people, against the Chemical Weapons Convention, despite the fact that they had agreed to it, and despite the fact that the Russians were their guarantors. So what happens next has everything to do with what the Assad regime decides to do. And it has everything to do with what the Russian government decides to enable as well. Stephanie?
Thanks, Sarah. Why does the administration, let's talk about this, and you guys have touched on this, but why does the administration feel these strikes are enough to deter the Assad regime from using chemical weapons again?
I'll pass it to the general in a second. We were very methodical in making the decision about these sites. And it was a deliberate decision to go to the storage facilities, to go to the research and development facilities. That was the difference. We think by doing this was very successful. And we are confident that we've significantly degraded his ability to ever use chemical weapons again.
One more. And what kind of response should the Assad regime expect from the U.S. if they were to use chemical weapons again?
One, I think it's very important to remember that this represents 3 permanent members of the UN Security Council who did this. The UK and France are our oldest allies. This is about values. We did this because it's intolerable for any civilized nation to tolerate the use of chemical weapons.